All right, looks like we're good to go. And I think most of you have met me already from the previous meetings, but my name is Ali Zabo. I work for NDEP, and we're here partnering with Partners for Sustainable Nevada. Particular project is Policy 7. We're looking at what sustainable programs are in Nevada, what's working, what's not, and trying to connect with those sustainability project managers. And we have Samantha Baker here from Clark County, and she's going to go through some of the efforts that the county is putting forward or that they're working on. So thanks for being here, Sam. I'll turn it over to you, okay?
Awesome. Thanks for having me. So I am Sam Baker. I'm the Sustainability Program Administrator for Clark County. And just to kind of give you a background from my perspective and where I come from, I've been with the county for just about a year. And I'm actually from South Florida, so I have a little bit of a different view than a lot of Southern Nevadans do, which is exciting, but it's also been kind of a process to just learn about all of the politics and the organizations and how everybody fits together. And, you know, how one of the biggest things I learned was the divide between the North and the South. And, you know, one of the things I've been really excited to do is be a part of PSN and find ways that we can better work together as a state, because there's so many different projects related to sustainability happening, and it feels like there's so much momentum. So I think there's really a lot of ways that we can work together. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, hopefully you see my main presenter screen and all is good. Yep, awesome. So I'm going to be talking about All in Clark County today, and you know, specifically, obviously, the policy and funding. But you know, really, All in Clark County is this big overarching brand that includes a lot of different types of projects. So hopefully I'll be able to compartmentalize each of those and make them all make sense within, you know, what phase of the planning process and all sorts of stuff like that. So what is All in? This started in 2019 with the direction of the Board of County Commissioners. They asked us to very quickly put together a sustainability and climate action plan. They said we needed to start acting on climate change yesterday. So what they did was they restructured our department. So the department that I'm currently in used to be the Department of Air Quality. So everything they did was related to air quality, you know, from monitoring to controlling to permitting, all of that. So they, instead of it being just air quality, they expanded to the Department of Environment and Sustainability. So at that time, we took on the Desert Conservation Program, you know, focused on endangered species and permitting for some of the land, but then also the Office of Sustainability. At that time, it was the first time that they had funded a full-time person related to sustainability. Historically, we had the Office of Sustainability, which lived under our Comprehensive Planning Department. And really what they did was they kind of just injected sustainability programs and projects where they could, but there wasn't an overall framework. So now we have an actual office that houses my position, and I'll go into details about the other positions related to the Office of Sustainability as well. In 2019, we also joined the County Climate Coalition, and then we set a goal for the county to reach net zero by 2050. So when we started putting this together, we were like, okay, what does All in mean? What is the sustainability and climate action plan that we want to put together? And so we came up kind of with this statement, and I'm just going to read it verbatim. To address climate change and create a more sustainable future, take a smart, bold, and inclusive approach to creating a sustainable community for the well-being and prosperity of all today and for future generations. And that is being led by our department for the entire county. So when we started the planning process, we wanted to make sure that we had a framework for all of our objectives, our programs, and our projects to make sure that we were consistent, but then also to make sure that we kept in mind some really important principles to us. So of course, it's going to be greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And then it's going to be an economic, environmental, and social resilience. A lot of times when we talk about resiliency, we talk about it from an environmental perspective, but we wanted to make sure to bring in that tripod of economic, environmental, and social, so it encompassed all of those different things. Also transparency. So we wanted to ensure full trust within local government as we're putting together this new plan that had never been done for the region. And finally, equity. So, most of you work in the sustainability field, and you know that historically, some different types of programs and projects related to sustainability or environmental issues left out certain groups or didn't take into consideration different groups' perspectives. So we wanted to make sure that we kept equity in mind when we were putting together our plans. So we see this in two ways to address climate change, which is pretty standard, of course, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, so kind of on that mitigation side, and then preparing for the impacts of climate change more on the adaptation side. So, had we acted on climate 25, 30 years ago, we might have just been focused on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, but because we've already kind of tipped that scale, we have to also approach climate change with the preparation for what's in the future. So I mentioned this all in, and I was really vague about it, but it really encompasses all of these different things. So when the county commissioners said, hey, put together this sustainability and climate action plan and do it tomorrow, we knew we couldn't put something together realistically for the entire region. Planning something for a county as large as Clark County that includes 2.3 million people plus, 40 plus million visitors per year, we knew we couldn't do that at the rate that they requested. So it made more sense for us to get our house in order, put together something internally that we could focus on county operations and lead by example. So we started with an internal sustainability audit, looking at our operations, what we were doing right, and then, of course, what we could do better. And we put together a plan, but we also put together an implementation strategy for county operations. And we wanted that implementation strategy there, so it wasn't a plan that just sat on a shelf. We wanted a plan that was actionable and implementable, and that made sense. So in our implementation plan, we actually break down a lot of the different actions, like what steps need to be taken in order for us to be like, check, that action's been done. So right now with the county operations plan, we're in the implementation strategy, and I'll go into details. We're in the implementation phase, and I'll go into details about that in a little bit. Next, we started putting together a regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Of course, this required us reaching out to stakeholders, gathering data, and putting together this report for the region so that we could see where our greenhouse gases are coming from and where we can take the biggest action to reduce our greenhouse gases. Right now, we are wrapping up a climate vulnerability assessment. And that's, looking at our systems and assets that are most vulnerable to climate change and trying to come up with resiliency strategies that will make us prepared for the future. And those are two data-driven pieces that are feeding into our community-wide sustainability and climate action plan that we are hoping is going to be out by the end of this year for public review, but it might be early 2023. So let's talk about our county operations plan. We broke it down into 5 key areas, from clean and reliable energy to water conservation and protection. And in putting together the plan, we saw these key areas as being helpful for us to kind of compartmentalize certain actions. Of course, there's going to be actions that kind of are cross-cutting or that help with the other key areas. But at least in putting it together, it makes it easier for us to focus each action at a time. And I pulled out some actions that are related to policy for our county operations plan. So first, sustainable transportation policy. So we're in the process of putting this together right now. And what that is looking like, it's looking at vehicle purchasing and replacement policy. So that's working with our fleet and, having some sort of plan as we phase out certain vehicles to bring in, more fuel efficient vehicles, electric vehicles, things like that. And we're going to be starting with light and medium duty fleet vehicles. That's also adopting remote work policy. So different departments at the moment have their own policy, but we don't have one that's written county-wide yet. So we're working on figuring out what that looks like. For resilient county operations, we're talking about adopting a criteria for all capital projects so that they're screened for resiliency and climate hazards. The reason that has not been implemented and we haven't started looking at that fully is because we are waiting for that climate vulnerability assessment, which had us speaking to all sorts of people who work for the county and trying to understand, which of our operations really need to be screened for resiliency projects, for resiliency. And then for our smart waste management and reduction policy, we're looking at centralizing all of our waste management to one department. Currently, the way it is each building has kind of a separate situation for waste. And so we have to start with an audit. We have to look at really where's our waste coming from, which department is in charge, and then finding one department that makes sense to kind of house all of the policy and all of the decisions based on waste. We're looking at paper reduction policy. This is in our plan, but of course, COVID kind of forced some of those things. So they're not written into policy yet, but most of our applications are online. Most of our storage is online, so we don't have to have those paper copies. And then enhanced reporting and tracking and contracts. So right now, the way it is, our contract with public services, it doesn't require them to keep track of certain things as it relates to waste. So we want to make sure that as we rewrite any of those contracts with any of our waste haulers, that it includes that tracking and reporting so that it helps us better understand our waste stream and where we can reduce the most. And then water conservation. Of course, in the Southwest, water is a huge issue. So we are in the process of rewriting our Title 30. This is through Transform Clark County. And that's going to be utilizing some of the information from Southern Nevada Water Authority and some of the recommendations that they have. So we can write that into our code. And then, of course, for county operations, we're looking at modifying our design guidelines to include green infrastructure and low impact design. We also have some cross-cutting policy and funding for our county operations plan. So, the way we see these sort of sustainable procurement policy, we want to have something that cuts across all of our different purchasing opportunities that's going to allow us, for example, now we don't have the policy written yet, but for example, local sourcing where possible. If we can purchase from within Clark County, that's going to be much better. Third-party product certification or standards. So looking at Energy Star, WaterSense, for example. We're looking at providing guidance or standard language for potential bids and proposals. Maybe writing in some contract provisions that make sure that the businesses that we're working with are utilizing recycled products, things like that. And then, of course, once we have that policy in place, it's going to require contractor and employee education just to make sure we're all up to speed and we understand what that looks like when we start, putting out requests for proposals and things like that. And then also capital project prioritization. So basically, the sooner you can make a decision, the easier the ability to make changes. And then, of course, over time, it's going to cost you more. So if you're in the middle of a project and then you decide all of a sudden, oh, we want to include this sustainable element, it's going to take a lot more money and it's going to be a lot more challenging to make those changes. So what we are doing is we're working with different departments to make sure that we include in our capital projects budgeting amounts, and we include those sustainable options right up front. And that kind of segues into our steering committee. So we put together a steering committee for county operations. This includes the departments that are leading our actions. So each of the actions within our sustainability and climate action plan, they are categorized by lead department and then partnering departments. And then that way we can say, okay, for example, I'm not doing the LED lighting retrofits myself, right? I'm not going up and I'm not changing those light bulbs, but our real property management department is. So one of our actions is, retrofit all lighting to be LED. So I can check in with that person from our real property management department and say, hey, what's the status? And they'll be able to provide me with updates, and they know that this action they're taking the lead on it. We're also hoping that this steering committee is kind of forcing from the top down implementation, but also a cultural shift. Sustainability hasn't been a widely discussed conversation with county employees, and we have 10,000 county employees. So this is an opportunity to help change that culture. If we bring together these department heads who are leading these certain actions, they can kind of go to their employees and say, hey, I'm going to have you take the lead on this project, or I need your support in this, and it's related to all in. So it's both implementation and that culture shift at the same time. During our meetings, we talk about challenges and opportunities. What projects are they working through and what challenges do they face? And, I think this is kind of common, but a lot of it is funding. There isn't funding available. But one of the things that we do is a reminder for capital budget requests. So when we're in that budget request timeline or timeframe where we can say, we want to do X project and we need X amount of dollars, we remind them, hey, don't forget about your actions that are in your action plan so that they can make those capital budget requests. And then, of course, they're going to give us progress updates on what they've accomplished. And we're hoping for biannual reporting from our steering committee each year to kind of keep on track of what we're doing with the county operations plan. So at the same time, while we were starting our implementation for our county operations plan, we were, still in the planning process for our community plan. And there were a lot of conversations about, well, electrification for vehicles is happening, but how do we get there, and how do we keep up with the market, and what does it mean, and how do we electrify our own vehicles? So my brilliant director, Marcy Henson, she said, let's put together a transportation electrification working group that helps us both with county operations and with community planning. So we hired a consultant, and they're helping us with this mission to develop, coordinate, and implement local programs and strategies to support transportation electrification in Southern Nevada in an equitable manner. So this group is kind of adjacent to our county operations plan and our community plan, but it still is kind of housed under those 4 guiding principles that I mentioned earlier, and it's helping us with implementation. So with the consultant that we hired, they helped us do site walks for all of our buildings to prioritize where we can install vehicle charging infrastructure. They also brought together certain groups so we can talk to community members and talk to organizations and learn about what is happening with local electrification efforts. Of course, looking at barriers and challenges. So what does it mean to install charging infrastructure at a multifamily housing complex, for example? Or, how much are we going to impact the grid by electrification? So working with the utility providers and trying to find solutions there. And then, one of the main things that we're trying to do is work with the utilities and the Public Utilities Commission to accelerate electrification, to remove some of the barriers that we're seeing as we're moving forward with vehicle electrification. And of course, I'm sure you've all read the news, the market is driving the electrification. People are buying electric vehicles left and right. And there are some communities that aren't too far away that are, going to ban regular gas powered vehicles within the next, I think, 12 years. So, we need to be prepared, especially because we are a tourism county. So we need to be prepared for people to come in from California driving their EVs. One of the challenges that we had when I first started was we were coming off of COVID, and the county was very specific with which full-time positions they were allowing for us to, start advertising for. So the Office of Sustainability was one, but we as a department are decently well funded. So we put together a fellowship program, and this fellowship program consists of 4 part-time temporary positions, and they are geared towards college students or students in grad school or just out of school looking to start their career. And we saw this as an opportunity to, number one, quickly recruit capacity for implementing our county operations plan, but number 2, to start really developing our workforce and helping the community have more sustainability leaders in Clark County. So we have 4 fellowship positions. The first one is urban heat. So this person is looking at, for example, our county cooling centers and looking at the capacity to host people on our extreme heat events, or looking at the utilization of our cooling centers. But really, now that we've kind of determined how much of a response we have to extreme heat, we can start looking at extreme heat mitigation techniques. So working with our county commissioners to talk about implementation of cool roofs and cool pavements and shade structures and tree canopy. But this position also put together a regional resource, stakeholdclarkcounty.com, that includes things like urban heat island maps and heat vulnerability maps, but also overlays those with the resources that we have available for really hot days, like libraries or our cooling centers or splash pads and pools, so that people have kind of a one-stop shop to go to learn about ways to cool off, but also weatherization programs, for example. This position has been doing a lot of regional and state collaboration. So one of the things that we just supported the RTC on was a grant-funded heat mapping campaign. So they had mobile sensors go out on vehicles and, test the temperatures in different areas throughout the day. So we'll be getting that data soon. We're also going to be partnering on some tabletop exercises for the region that are going to help us in our response to extreme heat. And then also, pooling together, we have so many different collaborators coming together to look at what policy recommendations do we want at the local level, but also potentially at the state level. We also have a fellow that's focused on employee education and engagement. We have, I mentioned, 10,000 plus employees. So this person's focused on helping shift our culture to a more sustainable culture for our employees. And then eventually we might be looking at required training for county employees, but right now it's, we're soft launch where we're trying to make it really fun and really engaging. We're putting together a Clean Cities Coalition. For those of you who are not familiar, Clean Cities is a program funded by the Department of Energy where they're focused on providing opportunities for people to move away from regular fuel, regular gasoline and diesel powered vehicles. So looking at alternative fuel options like electrification, but it also could include compressed natural gas, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, things like that. But one of the things that comes out of putting together a Clean Cities Coalition is potential grant funding that's only open to Clean Cities designated coalitions. And then also opportunities for all of these different organizations to come together and inform public policy. And finally, for our fellowship positions, we have a Building Energy Fellow who is focused on tracking their energy savings projects, but also focused on applying for rebates, specifically through NV Energy at the moment for some of the retrofits that we're doing. So I talked a lot about our county operations plan, and now we're moving towards our community plan. So we wanted to make sure that we had a very informed community plan. I mentioned that, historically, the region hasn't really come out with anything like this, and it was going to take a lot of buy-in. So community and stakeholder engagement was huge for us. This included 2 community-wide surveys where we reached about 6,000 people. It included some roundtable discussions where we brought together certain interest groups. We had one for environmental groups. We had one for the building and develop community. And then we had a couple for our energy partners, so mostly our utilities and the people who are working with utilities. We've done dozens of presentations and in-person events to start having conversations with the community, educating the community about what sustainability really means to Clark County. Of course, one-on-one conversations, not just with community members, but also with representatives from different organizations, trying to understand their perspectives, what they value, how can we work together in the future to put something together that's implementable, and that makes sense for the region. And then we also started a sustainability and climate advisory group that meets for 4 workshops to, we're in the process right now of getting ready to put together implementation blueprints. So it started with what strategies do we want to utilize? What actions do we want to prioritize? And now we're moving into kind of implementation. I mentioned that climate vulnerability assessment. That did not happen in a silo. We did not put together this giant report by ourselves. It started with a technical report or baseline looking at historical data based on climate hazards and then some projections for the future. That was followed up with one-on-one conversations with a lot of different stakeholders throughout the region to understand what systems and assets they found to be most vulnerable within their own operations and their experiences. We also put together a climate vulnerability stakeholder working group so that we could come up with some resiliency recommendations that will be published within the CVA. And I mentioned those resilience recommendations. And then finally, our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Again, that was not something that happened in a silo. It required us to form a core group to gather data from all these different stakeholders to make sure that we knew how many gas-powered leaf blowers, for example, we have in Clark County, to how much energy are we using within buildings. So all of these different people helped inform our regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory. It helped us put together an emissions forecast. So basically looking at, if we don't change a thing, what do our greenhouse gases look like in 2030 and 2050? And then also a greenhouse gas emissions pathways analysis. So what pathways can we take to reduce our greenhouse gases the most to really make an impact on the community? And those three pieces are feeding into our goals, our strategies, and our actions for our community-wide plan. I mentioned our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. This is a snapshot of it. You'll see in Clark County, electricity from buildings is our biggest emitter. On-road transportation, that means a lot of single person vehicles commuting to and from work, picking up kids from school. But also another high emitter is our solid waste. Clark County has the biggest landfill and the biggest recycling facility in the US, so we have a lot of opportunities to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions there. This is the pathways analysis that I mentioned. So utilizing some of these major strategies, we can see that by 2050, we can reduce as much as 72% by our major strategies that we have in place. But that means that we're also relying on some new technology and some reductions, new strategies in there that aren't that we haven't identified yet. I mentioned our climate vulnerability assessment. This is kind of it's a snapshot of what it looks like. So we broke down on the left, you'll see all the systems, from urban and community forests to water supply and quality. And then we looked at them on this vulnerability scale. So minimally vulnerable to highly vulnerable. So we know that the ones that are highly vulnerable, we need to start really taking some resiliency actions on. The ones that are ranked as minimally vulnerable aren't quite as important. When putting together our plan, just like we did for county operations, we wanted to frame it within some key areas. So we have clean and reliable energy to smart buildings and development. We have all these 6 categories that help us compartmentalize the actions that we're going to be putting into place. So our high impact strategies that we pulled from those greenhouse gas emissions forecasts and pathways analysis, we're looking at energy efficiency and demand management, which seems kind of obvious. But right now, where we pull our energy from, we're on a dirty grid still. So we're not looking at removing natural gas, for example. Right now, we need building efficiency to reduce our use overall. So providing weatherization programs and different support to both residents and to commercial businesses. Of course, we want to increase clean, renewable energy, and that's mostly through solar here. Transportation electrification, which I mentioned, and then organics to energy. We have 12.5% of our greenhouse gases come from our landfills. So how can we harness that to power some of our businesses and residential homes? So going back to this top one, the significant energy efficiency and demand management, that is what this little stacking model is that we have right here. And this is just an example, but what we're looking at is finding ways to utilize funding opportunities from a lot of different sources. So going from grants to tax credits and putting them all together in one place where residents or business owners can utilize those and can get all the funding they need to support those energy retrofits. So not just looking at it from a sustainability standpoint, but also some of those healthcare funds and the asthma prevention programs will help us be able to achieve that. So it's more doable for community members. Some example actions, like I said, we haven't put out the community plan yet, but some example actions related to policy and funding that we're seriously talking about is number one, under our connected and equitable mobility key area, actively participating in opportunities to share policy at state and utility level to prioritize fossil-free transportation resources. And then under our sustainable water systems is really aligning our jurisdiction's water policies and programs based on water agency studies, evidence, and then water resources plans. So we are really looking to Southern Nevada Water Authority to be the leader on water conservation and sustainable water, thinking about water for the future. So it makes sense that all of our jurisdictions within Clark County are in alignment to keep consistency and to keep that focus where we know that we will, no matter what, go to SNWA and say, okay, what do we need to do here in order to achieve our water conservation and our water quality and our long-term water planning goals? So for next steps for the community plan, we have our final Sustainability and Climate Advisory Group meeting next week. I mentioned we're going to be talking about implementation of the plan and what that looks like. That means which organizations are going to lead them. That means looking at the time frame, what steps need to be taken, all sorts of things that you need to consider when you're putting together actions and when you're trying to make them to a place where you can be like, check, we've completed that. We have some government and agency roundtables coming up, looking at ways that we can better collaborate with the other municipalities within the region. I mentioned we will have a draft community plan out by the end of 2022, possibly early 2023. The hopes are that the plan is adopted by the Board of County Commissioners in the spring of 2023. And then we're looking at implementation. And we're looking at implementation fast because a lot of our actions are only going to make sense if we get them done by 2030. So we don't have a lot of time to get that done. So I'm just going to leave you with this up at the top corner, that QR code. It is a link to our resources for where we pulled a lot of our data from. So if you go in there, you'll be able to look at our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. You'll be able to look at the climate vulnerability assessment technical report. Once we publish our CVA, that'll be on there. It breaks down our key areas in a lot more detail for the community plan. And then we also have some other resources from other agencies that we've pulled a lot of information from to help guide our plan. So I'm going to stop sharing and then I will open it up to questions. Allie, it looks like you have your hand up.
I did, and I forgot to mention earlier that we were going to use the raise hand function and leave questions till the end. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
So you mentioned in the earlier part of your presentation that you were going to visit with your waste haulers and perhaps look at those audits of the waste stream of, what's coming in, what's really going to the landfill, how much of what material. Do you know when that contract will be revisited, or is that something that's coming up soon? I know those contracts can go really long, so is that something that's way down the line or right around the corner?
They did just not very long ago renew our contract with Republic Services, and I don't think any specific language for sustainability was included in that, even though our department did provide some recommendations. But what we are doing is we are planning on hiring a consultant for our own county operations. So they're going to do a countywide audit to help us start with a baseline and really understand what our waste stream looks like. And then we've also just started a lot more conversations with Republic Services to determine better ways that we can go about reducing our waste and increasing recycling. And then hopefully they are, and I'm not saying that they've agreed to this at all, but we're hoping that they are going to take the lead on some of that waste to energy for the community-wide plan that we've started talking about.
So I know we're thinking the same thing of trying to figure out how can we do a waste stream audit. We just had a meeting. Kayla, my supervisor, just had a meeting with somebody in Washington. I think Washington did the whole state, if I'm not misspeaking. They did a waste audit for 147 different materials for the entire state of Washington. And so we were trying.
Who paid for that?
The state did, and they did it right after COVID though. So businesses were looking for, they caught it right at the right time. So they got in at a really good price. But I mean, it seemed still fairly affordable. I was like, it's gonna be millions of dollars. It's gotta be
Yeah,
so expensive. It's not. It's a 500,000 or less. So, but anyway, we've been looking at doing something like that as well. So I was just thinking maybe when you guys visit that, we could visit it together. Maybe we need to
yeah.
double down on that effort. So if that ever does come back up in conversation, let NDEP know because we're pretty much serving every other county besides Clark and
Right.
Washoe. So it would just be really beneficial to have that information for everybody, for the whole
Yeah,
state. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So I know our funding on that is limited. Basically, we have a lot of money for things that are related to air quality because of the way our department is, but not a lot of funding for other things. So we're keeping an eye on grants.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
so the same goes for you. If you come across a grant that has something to do with a waste audit or something like that, and you want to forward that to me, that would be really helpful. Just so,
Totally. Or if we could somehow make it do together, then we don't have, no one's doubling down on the same type of effort. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So, anyhow, and also kudos to the fellowships. I think that's a really great idea. My gosh, that's actually really genius. It's a great way to engage people who have just graduated, help them build their resume, and in turn, help you guys
oh yeah.
get
I will
things
I will
done.
add that one thing that we ended up not thinking about in the beginning, we were like, they're going to be a year-long fellowships and they're going to be able to complete X, Y, and Z. But it took so long to get them up to speed that we're like, there's no way they're going to complete these things in a year. So we did get approval to extend their fellowships for a year. So we'll have
That's
all of them
good.
for hopefully 2 years.
That's good. I think that's a great idea, though. So whoever came up with that one, I think, yeah,
It was Marcy. All of the good
Marcy.
ideas are Marcy.
Good
That's
job,
why she's the
Marcy.
leader. Rena, I see you have your hand up.
Thanks. Maybe just to add, there is now new development in waste management where they use artificial intelligence to sort out waste. Because one of the biggest problems with waste recycling is that you can never have 100% of, putting right thing in the right place. And then when it's come to the landfill, in the end, you have to do a lot of sorting, and that's what makes the process so ineffective. And now with artificial intelligence and ability to recognize different type of waste and sort it out quicker, because previously, all the waste management, it was based on physical characteristic of the waste. Like metal is simple, it's heavy, you separate it. But it's when you want to separate organic stuff, it's much harder. So I don't know, with a huge size of existing landfill, would they be intelligent for sorting?
That is a good question. I toured Republic Services last week, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but basically they have the potential to sort. I'm probably butchering these numbers, but let's say 2 tons an hour or something like that. But they're only doing 1.5 tons an hour because of the contamination rate. So I think that, like, if they could incorporate that AI, that would be fabulous, because then they said like they end up having to throw out so much because, people just aren't recycling properly.
So maybe we can have an internal conversation on this as well.
Yeah, I love it. Risa?
Hi. Yeah, hi. Thank you for your presentation. I found it really interesting. I'm actually from the East Coast. I'm new to the Las Vegas area, so in the New York area. So it's super interesting for me to hear all this because the challenges are so different in New York City compared to here. But I have a few different questions really. But one I was wondering was, do you find more pushback from people in terms of like trying to get them to recycle versus like say an opportunity to get people to be more on board with sustainable travel? So, or I'm sorry, transportation.
Yeah, I find that we've solved the waste issues. Everything that we've proposed related to waste reduction, increasing recycling, even the organics to energy, most people are like, yeah, that makes sense. But there has been quite a bit of conversation about the electrification of vehicles. You know, people are concerned with, you know, good reason. They're concerned about the grid being able to handle it. You know, if we're getting messages during the hottest days of the year, make sure you conserve, and at the same time we're getting a similar message that you should drive an electric vehicle because it's more sustainable, it's a little bit conflicting to people. So, you know, we're working on that, and of course we're working with the utilities as much as we can. NV Energy has been really open and honest with us about their plans to get a more sustainable grid, and then also to make sure that they can prepare for our, you know, increase in electrification. And I mentioned us going to the Public Utilities Commission. So one of the things that we've done, and I've only been adjacent to this conversation, so I don't know all the details, but we've hired a lawyer to help us navigate the process through the Public Utilities Commission so that they can kind of change some of their regulations that they have on the utilities so that the utilities can be a little bit more open with how they are moving towards sustainability. I know part of that has to do with how much money they're allowed to spend on incentives programs for their customers, but I'm like I said, I can't answer all the questions on that, but I know that that's one of the conversations that we're having.
Great, thank you.
Rena.
Yeah, let me add a few extra thoughts on this topic. I'm new in this country. I only moved to US in October last year and to Vegas in January this year. So my knowledge is mainly international, but from other countries, the solution to sustainable transportation, electrical vehicles is important, but in terms of cost effectiveness and achieving really significant impact to cut the emissions is actually much lower down in priorities than sorting out public transport. And if you look at situation in Vegas, from very little that I could see, you really don't have a good public transport. And things like light rail, things like a smaller type of buses running on maybe sustainable biofuels or electrified. There are so many other solutions that we can look at. I was a bit surprised that electrical vehicles was put as a first priority or first preference, because as I said, from international perspective, it doesn't make much sense. And also in terms of money, look, Vegas is a rich place. I'm not arguing it. So people maybe can afford electrical vehicles compared to other international situation. But I still think that we need to start directing our discussion towards other options as well.
And we absolutely are having those conversations, and we have some specific actions related to those that we're proposing for the plan. A lot of it's going to take the RTC to take the lead. You know, they provide most of our public transportation and most of our planning for that right now. So that will be something that we talk about next week, Rena, where we're looking at implementation and we're like, hey, RTC, are you going to be the champion of this action? And hope that they can say yes. In fact, we will be. So yeah, it's definitely. So when I was putting together this presentation, I wanted to really focus on the policy related actions more so than the potential infrastructure actions that we have coming into place. And right now our policy is related more towards electrification. Risa, do you still have your hand up, or is that a new question?
No, I didn't have another question.
Okay. Awesome. Well, if you guys have any follow-up questions, allin@clarkcountynv.gov is a good email, or you can get my email address from Allie afterwards. And, you know, feel free to follow up with questions or comments or anything like that.
Great. Thank you, Sam. This was really awesome. You did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
It was very
looks like Rena
interesting.
might have had one more question.
Okay.
I actually have a questions to ask us, if possible. Do we have a minute? I want to ask maybe Peter, because I saw quickly online supportive. Do you need any support on this? Because the concept is very good. I just wonder how far you are with this concept and what kind of support you need. Peter?
Maybe he stepped away from his computer. Peter, are you there?
Okay, so maybe we'll have to take this conversation to other opportunity.
Yeah, he probably stepped away from his computer or something. All right, well, yes, thanks again. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this for us and to present to our group. I know it takes time out of your day to put it all together and then to be here to present. So it sounds like Clark County, not sounds like, you guys are doing a lot. You've thought about a lot. You've put a lot of effort into it. That shows. I grew up in Vegas. I still have family that lives there. So Nevada thanks you as a whole for everything you guys are doing. So thanks again for everything.
No problem at all.
All right, guys.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Yes, have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Nice meeting you all.
Nice meeting you.